Hi, everybody. Welcome to Movement Notes podcast. I'm Olia, your host, and today Naya is joining me, my lovely colleague and friend. And hi, Naya. We're going to chat about initial consultation today. So, my 2 cents on initial consultation. From my experience as a student many years ago, though, I remember how much we were fixated on analyzing the movement and looking for what's wrong so we can fix it. And there was absolutely no emphasis on building the therapeutic alliance and understanding what client's life looks like outside of the studio. I wanted to discuss today what can we do during initial consultations so we can gather the best possible data we can that we can use in our work. So we can get a lot of information in this 55 minutes, why they're here, what are their goals, and also look at the movement. What do you think about that now?
I agree. Like it's definitely a people industry. And initially, as a new Pilates instructor, taking the ICs or the initial consultations is quite intimidating because you're supposed to know how to assess someone's movement, how they walk into the room, and take note of that while you're trying to gather all the other information as well. But I think you've got to remember that this is just how the client's presenting to you. They might be on their best behavior as well because they're just coming in. They know they're going to be looked at. So there's lots of different things going on. I think we've got a lot to talk about.
Absolutely. We work together in Pilates on George, and mostly we are together on the floor, which is really cool. And I think within the past couple of years, we designed an approach to initial consultation because we do it very similarly. I look at your notes after, I can understand what the client needs, and you can look at my notes after and hopefully feel the same way. So today we're going to discuss the framework and we'll try to keep it structured. But just a disclaimer before we start that I think it's really good to have a structure in place. When we have an initial consultation, we do kind of deviate from one question to another and we don't follow 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 by script. I start usually the same, but then I see where the client takes me and I just follow the lead. But this framework helps me to stay on track so we don't end up chatting the whole hour. I think this is a really good system in place. Link to this document attached in the show notes if anybody wants to download. It's absolutely free. We're going to start with the first overarching question or first pool of information that we try to gather, which is about the ability and the goals that the client wants to achieve. This is where it's very easy to slip into that, tell me what's wrong with you. And we want to reframe that into tell me what you do well. Tell me what you enjoy doing. So when you talk to the client, Naya, how do you approach that, finding out about ability and goals in this first initial start of the conversation?
I think initially I sort of want to know what they do now. What their day-to-day life is like, if they do any sports or activities, if they used to do sports and activities. There's so many times that you say to someone, oh, what did you do? What sports or things did you do as a kid? And they'll go, oh, I did gymnastics, but that was, so long ago. And then they'll go, oh, yeah, I remember doing that from gymnastics. It also can influence their movements as well. So if someone ever did ballet, dance, gymnastics, they tend to have a certain way that they stand. You watch the feet, you look at the hips. But it also gives me a clue that might be why they do that nowadays. So I look at all of those activities and then see what they do now. Do they still do any activity or have they dropped it? What does their day-to-day life look like? Do they have any habits or interests? What things can they continue with? What makes them happy?
I'm on the same page, and this will give you information about beliefs because their previous experiences probably formed what they strongly believe about their body, their abilities themselves now. I think we want to find out what the client really enjoys. So what they did in the past that really worked for them, maybe they can't do it now. Do they want to do it again? Maybe they can't do gymnastics at 75, but they want to have some flexibility. And I would like to point out here that we do want to write it down in clients' words. Instead of making assumptions, I usually write it down just the way they tell tell me, I want to drive 3 hours to Canberra without stopping and feeling like I need a rest, or I want to play with my grandkids on the floor instead of just sitting on a chair all the time, or I want to run, support my child's rugby training. And when I talk to them, I try to reframe it. Is it what you want to do? Is it what you want to work towards? So here we have goals, big and small. Not every client is chatty like you and I. Some people just say, well, I just want to be flexible. Our role is probably do our best to try and probe a little bit more. You know that theory of 5 whys? Can we ask why 5 times to find out a deeper layer of reasoning why they wanted to achieve that goal? And, the clients are so different and they're not always open to this philosophical conversation in the first session. But if they are not, I think at least this is something you can start. And as you know them, you will definitely gather more data that you can use. So
even as you're taking the session, and if you've moved on to a movement part of the IC, you'll get chatting about something and they will just say, oh, I wanted to do this, and you pick up on that. So it's those listening skills as well. You don't have to ask question after question. You can just start a conversation and take the bits that are relevant and then press on those. Then you're making contact with that person and you're reaching out, because you're listening to their interests. You've heard something they've said, so you're making a connection.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's the most important part, is that connection in the first session. The second overarching question that I think it's our duty to ask, or duty of care to ask, is the health history. Maybe you ask it before the client comes in, and then you have some of this information in the form they filled in. But I feel like you actually want to have a verbal response, because it's more than just ticking boxes, right? They have a little bit more space to share their thoughts. And obviously you want to ask what's in your body's history. The surgeries, the accidents, the pregnancies, the training history. It's very easy to stay on a surface level like, oh, I had surgery 3 years ago. But then as you start working, you realize that, 15 years ago, there was another surgery or there was another injury that were never rehabbed. And that will give you information. Okay, well, that ankle was never properly rehabbed or never followed up. That now gives you more understanding. So you want to find it probably before, like not after a year working together, but doing your best to find out in the initial consultation. What do you ask here?
And I think this is one of my favorite topics, isn't it? We've had many discussions about these things. So yeah. I'll try and limit myself. I will try and restrain myself. Clients don't remember what injuries they've had when you ask them. Again, it's that being put on the spot. When you start to move, they'll say, oh, I rolled that ankle. So you make note of where it is and you can ask them questions from there. So that's one thing. The second one, with any sort of interventions or pregnancies, not everyone's the same. So everyone's experience is slightly different. There's pain. You've spoken about pain in your newsletters. People have that experience very differently from, one person to the next. And the other thing about surgeries, which has become quite important in my work recently, is that not everyone's had the same surgery. Someone might have had surgery 20 years ago, and we're dealing with the repercussions of that now. The surgical world has moved forward and they have new technology and the recovery is much better. There's more physio, there's more rehab, there's prehab. They didn't have that 20 years ago. So we're dealing with people that have had very similar surgeries, interventions, but they've been dealt with very, very differently. Whether it was planned, whether there was an accident, whether there was trauma.
We spoke off air about the client that you're referring to who had a knee surgery a couple of years ago. Could you explain to people listening, because I think it gives a really good idea of why it is important to understand and to learn that history.
I've got a couple of clients with knee issues.
Okay, well, let's dig in.
That's one of my favorites. The knee can be really complicated because if you look at people that had treatment 20 years ago, in the 90s, hang on, let me just date check there. 30 years ago.
No, it's not 90s. No.
Wow. So 30 years ago, they were removing the meniscus from the knee. which is now not done. You know, that's something that is definitely now not done around the world, and we're looking at that now. But another person might have had a knee replacement more recently, like within the last couple of years, and they've got beautiful new implants in there that glide and are beautiful and are wonderful and move really, really well. But maybe their nerves got damaged. So they're dealing with a different type of pain. It's not the fact that the knee is enlarged and not moving and painful to move. The knee moves fine and the function is really, really good. But they have nerve pain from the incision. So there's so many different things that people could experience. You might not realize this until afterwards. If you can't see a scar, like if people are wearing leggings and they said they've had a knee replacement, you don't know if the incision's been one way or another. You know, at the hip, is it at the front, is it at the side, did they go in at the back? We don't know, and we don't think to ask those questions. But early on, it might affect people differently. But even later on, if they've had restriction for years and years and years, we're going to deal with that, and we're going to see that in their movement and wonder why they aren't moving a certain way.
If the client fills in the form before coming into the studio, they will probably mention that they had some knee surgery and so on. But if they mentioned 25 years ago, it's actually quite easy to brush off. That's why I think the conversation is so important, asking why, what, how, when, and understanding how much the client actually knows about how the surgery was done. Because I worked with his hip replacements and people have no idea how it was done, like where the incision was. They have no idea. Maybe they remember 6 weeks after the surgery, but not 16 years after the surgery. The memory is gone. And well, at least you understand, okay, we don't have this information. Then you decide what you're going to do. But maybe you have this information. Then you decide what you're going to do. The more data you have, the easier it is to make clinical reasoning. If you're the client listening to this podcast, this is a note to you to actually ask how the surgery was performed. Keep that paperwork, save it somewhere, because you may need it 10 years from today when the surgeon is no longer in practice, for example, right? So we covered ability and goals, and then health history. That is also quite important to get the data. And the third part of that framework is we want to understand daily activities and lifestyle a little bit more. Day to day. Okay, well, I work at the desk, they say. Fine. Is it a sit to stand desk? Are you working on a couch or an armchair? Is your desktop straight in front of you or to the side? One of my clients has 6. Because she's short, she has to look up all the time to see the top monitors. You want to understand the details instead of just, okay, well, that's a desk job, so I do 9 to 5. Means I sit most of the time and we tick the box and move on. What are you looking in this overarching topic in your clients now?
I want to know about work, obviously, but not everyone works. And I want to know about what they do. How do they get to the place? So if it's work, how do they travel? So do they sit for an hour and a half on a train and then sit at their desk all day? Do they sit in traffic? You know, I have a conversation with a couple of my clients, and it's to do with the way they sit in their car. You know, we've connected some differences in movement at their hip joint because of the way they sit in a car, and they're constantly just pressing the pedal. For those people that don't work, what do they do? Do they have children to look after? Do they have older people to look after? Do they, do they do a lot of gardening? What occupies them? Are they quite active? I know one of my clients had a job where she was very, very active, but she was exhausted. We spoke a lot about surgeries, but we didn't talk about underlying pathologies. So if people have these pathologies that affect them day to day, this might affect their work or their ability to work or how they move. They might feel pain all the time or not at all, or it flares up and then it goes, are they having a good day? Are they having a bad day? So that's, another day-to-day sort of response. But I'm looking for everything. I want to know everything.
That's our role, is like to keep asking. It's like your teenagers who don't want to talk to you, but you still keep asking. How was your day? Good. Okay, what did you do? Where did you go? Train yourself to be really curious, really care about the individual, not just ticking the boxes that, okay, well, I asked this, I asked that.
That's important as well, is that curiosity, because then you're planning. Habits are really, really important. You know, we've seen studies that have been released quite recently about consistency being the key for longevity or movement long term and the body being healthy. So if we know what a person does day to day, we can then give them exercises that they can use day to day, not make things too far fetched that they're like, I can only do that in a Pilates studio. They might take some of these things that we do and use them day to day, which is fantastic because they're taking it into their daily life. They're making it a habit, a daily habit, rather than just something they do for an hour once a week or twice a week. But they can actually change the way they move, the way they walk, the way they pick up things, children in particular, the way they carry the shopping, anything. If we teach them how to move well, they can then translate that into their daily life. But if we make it too hard and they're far too busy, saying to someone, take half an hour to stretch, that's unreasonable for someone who works 12 hours a day at a desk. But, while you're going to making your cup of coffee or while you go and get a cup of coffee, stand in the line, turn your head, twist, heel raises, prances, do something like that. That's more achievable to translate into day-to-day life. So it's really important to know about what they do.
Understanding that helps you to reframe the goal and then kind of reframe the movement. So instead of always using the cues that we learn in Pilates, which are fantastic, right? There's time and place for all of it. But then you can say, look, this is the movement that will help you, with your gardening, because we are training, for example, hip flexion and knee flexion here. Since you carry your child all the time on the right hip, we want to emphasize the rotation on the left. This movement still should exist in your body on both sides. Understanding what their day look like helps you to use the language that's really relatable to them, so you don't speak some sort of code in the classroom. Nobody likes to feel stupid. So if I don't understand something and I'm in an environment it's not my environment, right? I will just politely nod and we'll be like, okay, well, I don't really understand like what she's asking for, but it seems like something is working, so I will just kind of roll with it. But you want to establish that collaborative relationship where you can freely discuss things, and because that will help you to figure out what's not working. There will be some things that are not working. You will find them out before the client will not return to you just because it didn't work and without giving you any feedback.
There's a couple of times where clients have come in, and this is not to knock anybody's allied health professionals, but they have just nodded at appointments, and they come in with these printouts of physio exercises that they've got to do, and they don't understand, they don't remember how they were supposed to do them. The writing doesn't make any sense. The pictures show them what they're supposed to be doing, but it doesn't all make sense. So they want you to go through everything with them again. And it's just because that they didn't quite understand at the original appointment at the physio or the OTs or something, to do the exercises proficiently at home. And they just want some support, making sure they're doing it properly. So a lot of people are willing to do stuff. They just get put on the spot sometimes and don't understand.
Also, as a Pilates professionals or any movement professionals, we spend more time with clients than allied health professionals. So usually we'll be the ones, if they come twice a week for an hour, they will come to us, and they will probably go to the physio, every other week for 30 minutes. But they come to us consistently. We can establish that the relationship and help them understand what exactly it is. But we can only do it if we teach them that it's okay to say to us, I actually didn't understand what you just said. So understanding clients' background, their daily life activities help us to find a very efficient language to talk to the client, especially in the beginning, especially if they're just new, just learning. They may be very, very new to everything. Then there is a reformer, there is springs, shoulder rests, and then suddenly there are all these terms that they never heard of. So can be quite overwhelming, and I think we want to make them as comfortable as possible.
Agreed.
Yeah. So we're moving on to question number 4, which is beliefs and motivations. We already kind of touched a little bit on that, and we work with these beliefs every single day in the studio. And sometimes they are right, and sometimes they are maybe can be reframed slightly differently in the more positive ways. I guess we want to start this conversation into beliefs and motivation, not just asking what do you believe in, or like, are you motivated to come? But probably just starting to, if you haven't figured out from previous answers, you kind of want to understand what's the reason they came to you today and why today? Why not yesterday? Why not 6 months ago? Why not in 6 months? Why today? What pushed them? And try to weave it into conversation what they believe about their body, because if they're here today, there is a reason why. And very often, not all the time, but very often, it's something like the allied health professional said, look, you have to go and strengthen your core, you have to go strengthen your back. Or maybe they woke up one day, got pain, and then Googled that Pilates helps with back pain, and then they came to us. And then when you ask about the pain that they experience or the discomfort that they experience, that's where the beliefs will shine. XYZ said that my pelvis is uneven. I have this back pain because my pelvis is tilted forward and then it's hiked up. Usually the beliefs come from a person they trust. And that person said that probably with the best intentions, maybe not thinking of a long-term effect on a client. So I will not say, oh, don't worry about that. It's not true. The science moved on from that. The pain is much more complex. So yeah, we'll thread carefully how I approach that and how I kind of break that belief.
It is very sensitive, and we've got to stick within scope as well. So we can't say it's not that or it is that. We can just observe. As you said, we see people so often and we notice these things and we notice the way they move, and we might write it in our notes in the IC that they hip hike on the right side. They might not hip hike on the right side all the time. They might just do it when they do this one exercise. So, when we see them more, we can see that they don't always do that. So that's one of our beliefs that's been sort of shattered as well. It's like, well, that's okay. They're allowed to do things differently in different positions. And we don't want that to stay with them. We don't want other Pilates instructors reading our notes and going, oh yeah, guaranteed they have that hip hike. I think the big question is why Pilates? Because people aren't always going to come to us because they're in pain. They might be rehabbing something. They might be in pain. They might want to learn Pilates, through the whole repertoire. There's so many different reasons. So I always want to know why Pilates and then why us. Have they heard something about us? Is there something that's preconceived in their mind about Pilates or us as a company, Pilates on George? Have they heard something? Because then we've almost got an expectation to live up to before we've even started moving. It's important to know that so that we don't shatter their dreams, or let's aim to exceed them, but we need to know what they are.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with the scope of practice, but let me ask you a question then. What's your reaction when the person comes to you and they say that their back pain is coming because they can't maintain neutral pelvis in their daily life, for example? We heard this a couple of times before. What would you say?
Goodness me. I am a very curious person. I think anyone who knows me knows that. And I will always try and find out where that's come from and how I'm going to deal with it. So with some people, we have discussions. We have discussions as to why we think that inhibits that particular movement. Other people, and this is very common with the weight loss thing as well, other people get so fixated on something because they've been told it by so many different people that they've got an anterior tilt, that they could lose weight. They get told that so often that they start believing it themselves, and that's their barrier. So with people like that, I try to encourage them to do something that's a sort of a goal I set. So you say you can't do this particular movement. This repertoire says that we need that movement for it to happen. So we're going to aim to do that. And when they can do that, they're suddenly, elated. Oh, I could do that. And it takes away that fear of movement because I can't, because I've got this something. So encouraging people, showing people that they can do stuff, that they're not the product of what they've been told, I think is really important. So I deal with it in a number of different ways. It depends on the person. It depends on their personality and the relationship I have with them as well, because I have quite different relationships with a lot of my clients. Generally a bit crazy, but
I know that. But I think in this case, you want to offer small wins. And this is where building on progression really makes a lot of sense. You break it down to such a small, doable movement and then make it harder and harder and harder from there. The first exercise that comes to my mind, I approach short spine like this. Whenever I have a client who is scared, and obviously there are no contraindications and whatnot, right? So when they are just scared to go upside
Disclaimer.
down, yes, a disclaimer. Yeah, but when they are scared to go upside down, and a lot of people are, I will always say, just lift your hips up and down. Like you are drawing a wheel with your legs. You're not going upside down. Okay, well, does it feel fine? See how springs help you to do this? Now, maybe you can come up a little bit higher. And this is where the technique comes second to me. And I know many people may disagree with that. I'm trying them to do the movement as smooth as possible to understand that actually is quite doable. So it's a very easy movement. And then we polish and then we layer later on, which may not be in this session, next month. And I've been quite successful so far. I know it's just my experience, but I've been quite successful so far with breaking down complex exercises. Because with people who have certain pathologies that we have in the studio, it's very easy to get stuck in the fundamental repertoire, in just the basics. However, I feel like it's so much fun to show that they can do so much more than just a cat cow or a bird dog, right? So yes, these are good for you, but you can also do that. And I feel like it builds confidence very quickly. So my approach is that I want to know my intermediate progressive exercises really well so I can break them down and make them super basic to introduce them to any client. And yes, the basics stay there, the fundamentals stay there, but at some point it's so much more fun to show that they're capable. And that in turn breaks all those beliefs that probably don't have any grounds behind them, or maybe they are outdated as well. So maybe there was time and place for those, but now 5 years later, it's probably like not relevant anymore. Obviously, every client will be different. But I think being playful in the studio, so curious and playful in a studio, and you can do that when you establish the relationship with the client, which with the first 3 questions that we discuss will really help. So you get the data, you keep returning to this data. You said this, remember, or like, oh, I remember you have 2 children. I remember you have 2 dogs. So you remembered what they said. It's not just for notes.
And I think I want to add a bit to there. And again, unpopular, but this is my opinion, is that our job is to help people learn Pilates. The end. It doesn't matter if it's progressive, intermediate. Our job is to help them learn Pilates. That's what they're paying to come for. We don't need to show them that these are big exercises that are so complex that they can't do them. There's so much of that on social media. They go, oh my God, I'd love to do that, but that's far beyond me. It's like, well, why? Why is that far beyond you? It's not. We can get there. And it is about breaking it down. And, I think people go through this social media, Instagram's the big one. And there are so many exercises that are ridiculously complicated. And I know there's a few of us at work that have gone in and gone, why?
Yeah.
Why would we do that? But we get clients going, oh, I saw this on Instagram, and you're like, okay, well, we can do something that's similar. There's this, and we will break it down. We've got so many different Pilates equipment that we can make things a little bit easier. We can regress it. We can progress, even basic exercises are progressed. That's what the basis is. That's the foundations. So everything has a purpose for making it harder, making it more challenging later on. So there is always something, and you just have to make that connection. Talking to a student the other day, there was something that she just didn't get. It was horseback. It's something that's so complicated. And in my opinion, disclaimer, I think we complicate it too much. The way I look at horseback is that it's spine stretch on a barrel. It's spine stretch, slightly progressed because we've got that adduction to it as well. But essentially, that's the feeling. It's the going forward while going backwards. We're completely in control from fingertips to toes. And I said that to her, and she was like, "Oh, I get it." And she did horseback so well. And it was really lovely to see her, that she actually got it. She got it. I didn't put her in a position. I didn't adjust her to do anything. I didn't have to say anything else to get her moving. She just felt it. And that's a sense of achievement for her. So that was amazing to watch. And we see that in our clients as well. Something suddenly clicks.
That's what you build the client autonomy. Sometimes I ask my loyal clients who come to me and I said, if you come and I'm not here, I'm late, stuck in a train, are you able to do a session for an hour by yourself without me? And I'm always very happy to hear that. Yes, I can. So, and I think if I overcomplicate it too much, then the client is dependent on me all the time. And great for the business, they keep coming back. But at the same time, well, we want to learn, right? If I want to play tennis, I want to be able to play tennis by myself. I don't want the coach to always hold my hand and help me how to stand and all that. In the beginning, that's important, but then I would love to have a dynamic game, and maybe they just direct me with some tips and so on. So sometimes I think about it. Do we need initial consultation? Do we not need initial consultation? But the more I think about it, the more I get convinced that it's such an essential step. This is a chance to establish the relationship, to understand the client, and to learn all these things about them, so you can actually tailor the program for real for them. You can speak their language to them. You can find the exercises that will work and actually help them to get to understand them and be independent in doing them.
Yeah, and I'll add on to that and say, the initial consultation, that client might then go on to a semi. That they're not always going to go into an initial a private appointment. They might go into a semi with 3 other people. So it's important that you know that person ongoing. You got to know them. You've got that hour with them to know them, and that's ongoing. Then you've got your base to build on, then, which is great.
Absolutely, I agree. All right, so we have last bit is about learning and feedback style. We want to find out how they feel about the movement, what are their learning style, and if there is anything that you would like to avoid. This is the questions that I ask. Are you okay if there are tactile cues? Because I'm very touchy as a teacher. So I want to be sure that it's okay. And that's where the background we gathered before matters, because if you are dealing with an athlete, with a rugby player, they just push through, right? That's how they were conditioned. You want to establish, all right, so if we are doing Pilates and it's getting too much, or, you don't feel like it's for you, how are we going to chat about it? What's going to happen? Will you say it, or will I see it? So if you're grimacing all the time, is it painful, or it's just you're doing this, How do you approach this question?
This makes me laugh, because I always think, straight away, I thought of one of my clients who always pulls a face. Mm-hmm. And they were not one of my clients originally. They were passed on to me from someone who left the company. And so I've built this relationship with this client, and they always pull this face, and it's the same face. And I sometimes have to say, does that mean this or this or this today? And they'll answer me. And it's just funny. We have that relationship, thankfully, and that connection that we can laugh about it. But it's the same face, whether it's pain, struggle, stretch. It's the same for everything. I think the people who stay with me, they know that. So I will just be quite forthright with questions. You need to tell me if this hurts. It's not just good pain, bad pain. It's is this pain? Is this just uncomfortable because it's something that you don't do? I think it's being quite open and saying, and setting the boundaries as well. You need to tell me. I can't see. I don't know what your facial expressions mean.
The important part where you set the tone that the client is in the driver's seat, it's not you bossing them around for the whole hour, actually. It's totally fine to say, it doesn't work for me. I don't understand. Why am I doing this? And we can figure out together. I may not have all the answers right away, but we can figure out together. And exactly, it loops back again to these questions prior, where you are genuinely curious to understand how the person go around their day, how they learn, what they do, what they are after. So then you can have that relationship with the client. I have some clients who don't like a tactile cue, and we discussed it prior. And if I offer a touch, I always ask permission, and it's only a very just a light touch.
It's been very respectful, isn't it? And that's why it's really handy with anyone's notes as well. When we read clinical notes from other people's clients, it's like if they don't like tactile cues, you are very clear to that client. You know, I read this in your notes. I understand. You set those expectations from if you're covering someone, or if they become your client.
That's it for today. We have 5 questions. The first question is ability and goals. The second question is health history. The third is daily activities and lifestyle. Fourth, beliefs and motivations. And 5, learning and feedback style. There is no particular order. It's not a strict setup, but in the file of this framework that we share with you guys, you can see all the questions that are included in those topics, and you can take it from there. The link will be in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining me, Naya. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. Always fun to chat. And I hope we'll catch up again. All right, guys.
Awesome.
Bye-bye.
See you later.